Thank you for joining us today. Hello and welcome to our COVID-19 vaccine question and answer session. My name is Hala Abusin and I'm here today to take all your questions. Some of them have already been submitted, some of them live. We'll be here for the next hour taking your questions. I'll be asking the questions on your behalf and keeping track on time. As I said, my name's Hala Abusin. I'm a local community pharmacist, a local community leader, and I'm passionate about healthcare and advice on health information as well. So my job today, as I've told you, I'll be acting on your behalf, asking the questions of the experts. Some of them will be coming through on the YouTube chat live. So just one thing I'd like to let you know is if you'd like to post some of the questions live on YouTube, you need to be signed in to your YouTube account or through your Gmail. So keep those questions coming, please. There's no such thing as a silly question. If it pops into your head, you can ask it of us. The reason we're here today actually is to answer as many of your questions as we can, address any of your concerns, and we have some lovely moderators helping us out today. They will be making sure that we keep track of the time, that we stay within the 1 hour, and if you have any problems, you can always pop a question in the chat for them. So today we also ask that you are respectful of others when you are posting on YouTube, on the comments, or if you are commenting. The reason being is everybody's here to learn and to get some of their questions answered, and we would like to remain respectful. We regret that if anybody is seen to be less so, they will be removed so that everybody else can continue to enjoy the session. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our two researchers today. First of all, I would like to introduce Helen.
Hi there. It's great to be here, Hala. Thank you very much. My name's Helen Skirrow. I'm a clinical research fellow at Imperial College London. My interest is in vaccine uptake, and I also work for Public Health England in outbreak response as part of the clinical team there, managing COVID-19 outbreaks.
Fantastic. And next, I would like to introduce Paul.
Hi, my name is Dr. Paul Mackay, and I'm a vaccine research scientist. And I also work at Imperial College, and I'm in the team that made the Imperial College vaccine candidate. And I've been working on vaccine development for over 30 years.
That's great. Thank you. So just to start off with, I would like to ask some questions, some of them that have been submitted by some of our viewers today. So Helen, if I may come to you first. The question that I would like to address to you is, first of all, lots of questions from the community that have come in regarding the ingredients and whether the ingredients are aligned with religious beliefs or other beliefs, whether their vaccines have alcohol, any fetal material, any pork. So can I just ask you to answer that question first, please?
Yes, I think that's a really important question. And you're right, I've been asked it before, and I think it's a really common question that comes up when you're speaking to different community groups. So to provide some reassurance, in the vaccines that we're using in the UK at the moment and have been approved, there's absolutely no animal products that are contained in those vaccines. So there's no egg or any animal-derived products as well. There's also no fetal cells or human embryonic cells in those vaccines either. I think if anyone does have questions, it's really useful to look at resources that are trusted, such as the British Islamic Medical Association, which really does discuss the ingredients of the vaccine. For example, the AstraZeneca vaccine does contain ethanol, which can sound scary for certain sort of religious groups, but actually the amount that it contains is comparable to, for example, a slice of bread. So it's really nothing to be concerned about. So yeah, I think look at trusted resources such as the British Islamic Medical Association, but really we should be reassuring people that there are no animal products in those vaccines that we're using.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And one other question that I'd like to address to you, Helen, as well. Can you get COVID from the vaccine?
Yeah, again, this is a really common question, and again, quite a simple answer in no, the COVID vaccines cannot give you COVID-19 disease. So you really shouldn't be concerned if you're going to get vaccinated and you've been vaccinated. There's no way the COVID vaccines can give you COVID-19 disease.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, this leads me to a question that I have for Paul. So how is the vaccine made? If the vaccine cannot give you COVID, can you give us a little bit more about how the vaccine is made, please?
I can. So the vaccines that are currently on the market, there's two main types that you've probably heard of. The AstraZeneca one, which is an adenoviral-based vaccine. It's just a different type of cold virus. And then there's the Pfizer-BioNTech one, which is based on RNA. So both of these work in a very similar way, in that they go into your cells. The code for the spike protein from the surface of the coronavirus is then used to make that protein inside your cells, which then the body recognizes as being different than its normal body, and it mounts an immune response against that. So essentially you have a really small part of the coronavirus itself is made inside your body, and then you react against it. There's none of the rest of the parts of coronavirus. There's no nuclear protein, there's no DNA from the coronavirus, RNA from the coronavirus. So it's just this little sequence that is made, and that's what the antibodies and the T cells in your body react against.
Fantastic. That's actually a very comprehensive answer. Thank you. My next question is how is it possible that the vaccine was made and approved so quickly and so swiftly? Were there any corners cut? Were there any steps that were skipped? And so the speed with which the actual vaccine was made, how can it be so fast and still be safe?
Sure. This is a massive concern for a lot of people. And it's really not the case that any corners have been cut. All of the usual and standard safety assessments have been done on each one of the vaccines that are currently being used in the United Kingdom, and actually throughout the world. All of the different countries which are using sometimes different vaccines, they have all done their own safety assessments. So these safety assessments include the phase 1 and 2 clinical trials, which assess basic safety and whether it does anything at all. And then there's the phase 3 efficacy trial, which assesses on a much larger scale, continuing the safety assessment, but also does it have any effect on the disease at all? And those are the things that came back as being positive. It showed that the vaccines that were used had a really high efficacy in stopping the disease, stopping hospitalization from the disease. And so that is why these vaccines have been rolled out. But that's just this year. Those assessments have been done on the actual vaccines this year, but the technology that underpins these vaccines is not new. Even the RNA technology is not new. There was a vaccine made in 2013 that was put into people in a phase 1 trial, and it was shown to be perfectly safe. There was Professor Gilbert from Oxford has been working on the adenovirus system for 15 to 20 years. So these are not new technologies. These are technologies that were existing and have been repurposed for COVID.
It's fantastic. I feel reassured now, and I hope that everybody listening to us will feel reassured as well. So there have been some questions that were pre-submitted, that were submitted before the event. So if I can just go through some of them, and I'll ask each one of you the question that I feel is relevant to your area of expertise. That's okay. So first of all, I have got a question from Andrea, and Andrea's asking, do the vaccines prevent long COVID? And I will come to you, Helen, for that one, please.
Well, I think that's $1 million question. I have no shame in saying what we don't know. And I think I would say that probably comes into one of the things that we don't know about the vaccines yet. So what we do know from the clinical trials, and we've got really good data on, is that the vaccines that we're using prevent serious cases of COVID-19. This means that it will protect you against becoming seriously ill with COVID-19, needing to go to hospital, maybe put on a ventilator, and also it prevents deaths from COVID-19. We've got really good, strong evidence about that, about the vaccines. What we have less evidence actually about is about whether the vaccine prevents you from getting the virus that causes COVID-19, and actually whether it stops you transmitting that virus to other people. So what we don't know is whether it might actually cause people to still get the virus and maybe have a mild or asymptomatic infection that they could still transmit to other people, and that they may then develop long COVID. So I think it's something that's being really closely followed, as everything with the vaccines, it's being really closely followed. It's a really important question. I'm glad it's been asked, but I think we have to be really honest. We don't know at this point. I don't know if, Paul, if you've got to add anything to that, but I think that would be my answer.
The only thing I would add in, of course, is the actual experiment and assessment is being done in real time with all of the 16.5 million people who have now received the vaccine in the UK. We're all going to be getting data from that, and we will see in a fairly short time, within a few months, whether it has an effect on exactly what Helen was saying, the transmission of the virus, whether it has an effect on the actual viral burden in your own body after you've been vaccinated, and therefore will it have a downstream effect on the long COVID symptoms. I mean, we would think that if you had reduced the viral burden in your body, you have less of a chance to develop long COVID. But of course, we have to be driven by the data. We have to look and see what actually happens. And so that information will be coming, but not yet.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. I'm sure Andrea will be very happy with that answer. It's been very informative. So another question I have from Sudhir: do the effects wear off after a while? And how are scientists monitoring the effects? The
effects of what?
Of the vaccine.
Of the vaccine. Oh, so gosh. Yeah. So the effects of the vaccines are actually really minimal. What you usually get with any vaccine, if it's a vaccine that works well, is perhaps some soreness of the arm, some headaches, and some slight elevation of temperature occasionally. But these are all very, very short-term effects, and they will be gone within 48 to 72 hours at the very outside. There have been no reported long-term effects so far with the COVID vaccines, either type that is being used in the UK. But Helen's a doctor, so she probably knows much more about what's happening in the community than I do. So I'll hand over to Helen.
No, I mean, I think exactly it. Any side effects that you might get from the vaccine, as Paul said, will be very short-lived, as they are for almost all vaccines. The side effects that we see are normally very short-term, sore arm, muscle aches and things like that. And it's unlikely that we're going to get long-term effects, but obviously these would be monitored as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I would like to go to a question that caught my attention earlier on. So we have two questions actually, and I'll try and group them into one long question. So one question by Sophie was, will the vaccine weaken the immune system? And then we also had another one from Daniela, and it says, as the mRNA vaccines are getting our body to produce a viral spike protein, how is it possible for the vaccine to prime our immune system for a possible infection without causing an autoimmune response? So I just thought I'd group them together because they're immune system related.
Shall I take this one?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So there is a very, very low likelihood that production of a foreign protein within your cells will lead to autoimmunity. Autoimmunity is something that happens in people all the time. You have an immune response sometimes against your own DNA. It doesn't mean that you're going to develop an autoimmune disease. And the amount of reaction against the viral spike protein should not generate any kind of immune response that will then be directed against yourself. It's been shown that it's very focused and directed against the viral spike protein from the coronavirus. So the autoimmune aspect, I don't think is an issue that anyone should be concerned about. And the other part of your question was,
will weaken the immune system.
Oh, well, no. So the immune system is a big place. Every day we get foreign antigens in our body when we eat food, for example. We have systems to make sure that our immune system doesn't overreact to all of these things. But the reason a vaccine is made in the way it is that we want to try and force a reaction against that viral spike protein. So we have a directed immune response, but as the immune system itself is so large, it's not going to affect the rest of the immune system. It's just going to go into your arm. The reaction is going to be in your arm and also in the draining lymph nodes that drain your arm. And then they're going to produce antibodies and T cells, and they're going to be very directed. The rest of your immune system isn't affected or weakened in any way.
That's fantastic. Very, very comprehensive. I'm really liking that. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I have a question here. I think I'd like to direct this question to Helen, please, if I may. We've had lots of questions that have come in about this particular subject, so I will ask it all in one. So Daisy asked a question about, will the vaccine cause infertility? But also I would like to maybe extend it with my own question as to the effects in pregnancy and breastfeeding women.
Okay, so that's a big topic, so it might take a while to answer, but just to nip the infertility one in the bud straight away, there's absolutely no evidence that actually any vaccine affects fertility of women of childbearing age. And unfortunately, the misinformation that's got out there about COVID-19 vaccine and infertility is just an example of a myth and misinformation that's gone out. So we really need to reassure women of childbearing age that the COVID-19 vaccination, if they are offered it for any reason, will not affect their impact to be able to get pregnant in the future. And indeed, there is no need, if you have been vaccinated against COVID-19, to delay pregnancy after having received the COVID-19 vaccination. And that needs to be really clear. Then around pregnancy and the COVID-19 vaccination, I think some confusion has arisen because there was a change in the guidance that was delivered in the UK. Yeah. So to begin with, when the Pfizer vaccine was first introduced, it was said that it shouldn't be offered to pregnant women. And then at the very end of December, the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation, the JCVI that you've probably heard a bit about, so they're kind of the expert panel who invite the British government on vaccination, they changed and said that the COVID-19 vaccine could be considered for two groups of women who were pregnant. So those are pregnant women who, because of their job, for example, might be at increased risk of getting COVID-19. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about frontline healthcare workers, for example. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, groups of women who are pregnant who are at increased risk of becoming seriously unwell if they were to get COVID-19. So that might be somebody who has sort of specific heart conditions, for example, or other sort of respiratory health conditions. If you are one of those two groups of women, it's advised that you discuss with your healthcare provider, doctor or midwife or anyone about having the COVID-19 vaccine. So at the moment, COVID-19 vaccines are not recommended for all pregnant women, but if you fit into those groups, it might be worth having a discussion with your healthcare provider about having the vaccine. I just also would like to say that pregnant women were not included in the COVID-19 vaccine trials, but we've got really good data from, first of all, other vaccines that we've really safely used in pregnancy for a long time, the seasonal influenza vaccine and the whooping cough vaccine. We've also got really good data from those early clinical trials that Paul was talking about, so animal models in the laboratory, that there's no evidence that the COVID-19 vaccine would have any impact on reproductive or any negative reproductive effects. We've also actually got some women who received the Pfizer vaccine in the trial and then inadvertently went to go on and get pregnant. It's quite a small number, I think about 23, the last time I checked. But they've actually gone on to get pregnant, and there's been no poor pregnancy outcomes among those women who went on to get pregnant after receiving the Pfizer vaccine. So yeah, infertility and Pfizer vaccine, not a concern, no evidence on which to support those claims. If you are pregnant and a frontline worker at increased risk or increased risk of being ill from COVID-19, discuss with your healthcare provider or doctor, and also be reassured that we use vaccines in pregnancy for quite a long time in this country very safely.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. There you have it. I think Daisy will be happy with that answer. So there is another question that came from Nadia. Do we need new antibody tests after the vaccines, after we become vaccinated? If we have the vaccine, will we need new antibody tests? And I think I'll take that question to Paul, please.
So we don't. One of the reasons is that the antibody tests don't just rely on the spike protein for the readout. They use 2 other proteins from the virus. So you have to have actually seen the virus rather than just the vaccine. But in addition to that, probably what would be used after you had received the vaccine would be a PCR test. And this PCR test would determine whether you've got an active infection with the virus rather than having an immune reaction against it. So in the case where you may have some cross-reactivity with the current circulating variant strain of COVID from your original vaccine, they would use a PCR test to confirm whether you're infected or whether you are not infected.
Okay, thank you. That's actually a very good question, Nadia, and I'm glad you asked it because I wanted to know the answer to that myself. So thank you. So I also have another question from Kat. What are the recommendations for atopic individuals and for people in the audience, people who have atopic illnesses are people with genetic tendency to develop allergies, to allergic reactions to foods and other sort of external allergens. So things like hay fever, eczema, and what Kat was saying is, what are the recommendations for those individuals? Because there is usually a heightened immune response to common allergens. So what is the vaccine effect on those people? And that's to you, Paul.
Okay. Well, Helen probably can add to my answer whenever I've finished, but yeah. Basically there is currently not a contraindication of taking the vaccine, even if you have got significant allergies to other things. So allergies, as everybody knows, are usually quite specific. So you've sometimes got peanut allergy or a latex allergy, and there's nothing really in the vaccines that has been shown to have a significant effect on people who have already got pre-existing allergies. The one thing that is in the Pfizer vaccine, which may cause an issue, is the PEG. So PEG is a very common substance which some people do seem to have a reaction against, and it's important for those people in particular to talk to their physician, to talk to their doctor and get the advice of their doctor before they get the vaccine. And also, if they don't do that, whenever they're talking to the person who's administering the vaccine, for them to tell that person, so that if there is any indication that those people are having a reaction after receiving the vaccine, then the medical professionals who are there are able to do something about it. I think that's covered most things, Helen, but you might have extra.
Yeah. Helen, would you like to come in with something?
Yeah, so basically, Paul's completely right. There's no contraindication. So people with allergies to egg or anything like that, or who might carry an EpiPen for peanut allergy, they're not recommended not to have the vaccine. They can have the vaccine. There's only 2 contraindications. So there's 2 groups of people who wouldn't be advised to have the vaccine. That would be someone who's had a previous serious allergic reaction to a previous COVID-19 vaccination. And when I say serious, it would be an anaphylactic reaction, which might needed treatment. So a previous COVID-19 vaccine, or if they'd had a serious anaphylactic type reaction to any of the ingredients that are contained within the COVID-19 vaccine. But those are the only 2 things. As Paul completely correctly says, the advice is if you have had a serious allergic reaction to another substance like anaphylaxis, it might be a good idea to mention to your vaccinator that that's happened. And just also be reassured, I've done the training for this, all vaccinators in the UK have to undergo training for managing anaphylaxis reactions. So actually, the people who are vaccinating have that specialised training to be able to manage any reactions, but they are incredibly rare. So it shouldn't be a cause for concern.
So Helen, somebody's just come through asking if you have a serious reaction to the flu vaccine, would that be a contraindication?
So no, that's not one of the clear contraindications if you've had a sort of serious reaction to the flu vaccine. I think the thing is, we need to consider what a serious reaction is. And when we talk about serious reaction, we're sort of generally thinking about those sort of anaphylaxis type reactions where your airway might have been compromised, you might need adrenaline. And I think it's about, just because you might have had a reaction to one vaccine, I can't say how you're going to react to another vaccine. All we can say, as Paul's previously described, that the common things are a sore arm, feeling tired, maybe a bit of fever or a headache. But there shouldn't be, again, you can mention it and you want to have a discussion with somebody, you can talk about that, but that shouldn't be a contraindication, no.
And of course, the other thing to say is that all these vaccines aren't the same. The flu vaccine is actually in physical nature really, really different. So it's like chalk and cheese almost.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I have a question that interested me as I read it from Corinne, and I'll probably just add my own little bit to it at the end. So Corinne was asking, why do we still need to be careful once we have had the vaccine? And on top of that, another frequently asked question is, how long does it take for the immunity to kick in after the first dose? And then how long after the second dose? And can I come to Helen or Paul? Because Paul, you were nodding, so
that's a fatal error to nod.
So the immunity after the first dose. So this has been in the scientific literature for a while, and basically it was the premise of the government's decision to have a longer space between the first and second dose, but that's a different question. We'll probably come to that later. So from 12 to 14 days after the first immunization, with either of the vaccines, it has been noted that the number of hospitalizations and severe outcomes from infection goes to almost zero. So that's an extremely important metric. It's, of course, all our lockdown, all of our restrictions on our life has been premised on the fact that there's so many people in hospital and there's so many people that are dying from the disease. So 12 to 14 days after the first immunization, that stops. So the immunity is building up over time after the first immunization, and it gets to a certain level where severe outcomes stop. So that doesn't mean that you don't get infected with the virus. It doesn't mean that you don't have mild symptoms, but it means that you change from being a person that goes on to develop severe symptoms to a person that copes with the disease, and then your memory response, your immune memory response kicks in and is able to get rid of the virus. So after the second immunization, which can be given from 3 to 12 weeks after the first immunization, we know that that is an important way of prolonging the immune response. It does make it larger again. It does a step change in the degree of the response, but it's thought to be important in making sure that the response lasts long enough to cover the season, or maybe 2 seasons or 3 seasons. That's still to be determined. And then your first part of the question was?
Well, the first part of the question was, why do we still need to be careful?
Oh, because you can still be infected.
Yeah.
Because we have given the people the vaccines, but that doesn't mean that they are what's called sterilizing vaccines. They don't stop you from getting infected. We also don't know, and this is where it comes back, where everything has to be data and science driven. We also don't know that how long a person, once they have a vaccine, if they then get exposed to the virus and it's in their nasal passages, we don't know how long they keep it there for, and therefore spread it to other people who aren't vaccinated, or to vulnerable people who cannot be vaccinated. So it's important that we still have to be careful, still wear masks, still maintain social distancing until the R number gets right down and the number of infected people in our community is low enough for people to loosen those restrictions. Okay.
Thank you very much. I really think that these messages are quite important because with the vaccine, once somebody's vaccinated, we have to also talk about how we're protecting others, so we're having to be careful because of others around us as well as ourselves. So that was actually a very good question and very good answer. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask Helen why the gap has gone from 21 days to from 3 weeks to 12 weeks, and the effectiveness of the vaccine in that time.
So I think Paul has sort of covered the kind of data around the immune response data as to what happens at different time points after the vaccine. I think the change in the dosing of the Pfizer vaccine to extend the interval between the first dose and the second dose from 3 weeks to up to 12 weeks was again made by the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation experts in the UK. And they really are top-notch panel experts who are incredibly experienced at advising the UK government on vaccine schedules. So they reviewed all the data and made the decision that in order to protect the highest number of people from the adverse consequences of getting COVID-19 disease and being admitted to hospital, being on a ventilator, and also reduce the number of deaths, the best thing to do was to get the first dose into as many as people as possible, as quickly as possible. So in short, it was an operational decision for the UK vaccination programme, but it was based on data and data analysis that they did based on the good phase 3 clinical trial data that Paul's discussed about the immune response that you get after a few weeks after the first dose. I would really like to highlight, though, that whilst we have evidence and the JCVI has recommended that we have this wider spacing between the first and second dose in order to protect the most number of people, that when you get your appointment for your second vaccine, and hopefully you might have already been given that if you've had your first vaccine, you must attend for that second appointment. It's really important that you get your second booster dose for the vaccine to provide that longer term protection that Paul discussed. So it really is important that you maintain social distancing and follow all the guidelines and still get that second dose of the vaccine as well.
Thank you for that, Helen. One of the other things that I think we maybe hear quite a lot about is the hesitancy in certain groups. And I have been asked the question, so maybe I can get the answer from the experts here. But somebody was asking me 2 days ago, why does it feel that there is targeted messaging towards the BME community that they must take the vaccine, they must have the vaccine? Why is there a particular group that's being targeted with the messaging for the vaccine?
So I'll go for that one.
As I was going to say.
So the reason that we've got targeted messaging is that we have, first of all, evidence that certain groups of people from different ethnic communities are at increased risk of being contracting COVID-19 and becoming sick with COVID-19, and also being at increased risk of dying from COVID-19. Secondly, we have some evidence that there might be some vaccine hesitancy, which I don't really like as a term because actually it just means less vaccine confident among certain groups. And we also know from research about other vaccines that the most important thing to make sure that people are vaccine confident is that they get trusted information from somebody that they trust. This could be a healthcare provider that they trust in the local community, or it could be somebody in their community who's very influential. So this has really meant that we've done a lot of targeting messaging, and community champions have been amazing, and community groups have really, really stepped up to make sure that clear messaging is getting out there. because unfortunately there has been misinformation about all aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic, not just vaccination, but misinformation, and social media means misinformation can spread very quickly. So that targeted messaging is really just to make sure that we've got clear, consistent, trusted advice that's getting to the right people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think there's another question from Ryan in the audience that's very related to that I could just pick up on, talking about the flu vaccine uptake compared to sort of COVID-19 vaccine uptake, so sort of looking at historical concerns. And I think we have got some early evidence that actually in the over 80s that were vaccinated, that there were a lower rate of COVID-19 vaccination among Black or Black Afro-Caribbean people over 80. And that was from a big study that was done by a group in Oxford looking at medical records. We have got some early evidence from the COVID-19 vaccination programme that these differences in uptake of vaccination that we know from the flu vaccine programme and other vaccine programme maybe did happen in the COVID-19, which also meant that we had to do a lot of targeted messaging as well. But actually the data from the next cohort with the over 70s that we're seeing, showing that actually that difference is sort of starting to even out as well. So just to answer Ryan's question, I hope that helps.
Brilliant. That's very good. I'm going to sound so intelligent now in the pharmacy when I'm answering questions after this session. So I'm not sure whether there have been any questions that have come in live through the YouTube channel. Anything in the chat?
I think this one must have come in live, because from Paige, and she is asking, would getting the virus or being exposed to the virus between vaccination doses change the vaccination schedule in any way? And what about having symptoms but not testing positive for COVID-19? So I can answer that one in that being exposed to the virus in between vaccinations is unfortunate, but it's not a disaster in that you already have had some immunity from the first vaccination. And I would personally recommend that you, once you've fully recovered, that you do attend and have your second vaccination. The reasons for this are just so that you can have a complete vaccination record, but also whenever you became infected with the coronavirus, you may not have got, it's not like a clinical trial situation, it's just a random event. So you want to comply with the data that we have for clinical trials and have the second vaccination. There is some talk about whether if you've been vaccinated, if you've been infected before, whether you only need one vaccination, but actually those clinical trials are being conducted, but have not got a result yet. So we need to wait and see what actually happens. So to protect yourself fully, get the second vaccination. What about having symptoms and not testing positive for COVID-19? I think that means you've got some other cold virus. All these symptoms are very similar. The COVID ones in many people have a resemblance to an ordinary winter cold. In some people, of course, it's much more severe. But basically, if you have symptoms of fever, runny nose, aches, etc., it could be any one of the multitude of viruses that infect people every winter.
So just to add to Paul's answer, the guidance is really clear that if you've had even if you've had a previous COVID-19 infection prior to the first dose of vaccination, it's in no way a contraindication to getting the COVID-19 vaccination. The advice is if you've had COVID-19 recently, for example, you've had it and you've tested positive, the advice is first of all to wait 28 days from the onset of symptoms, or 28 days from when you tested positive to when you get your first dose of the vaccine. And that is actually, it's not really a safety thing. It's just to make sure that, first of all, you're fully recovered. Because actually, if you're feeling unwell, you're advised to not get the vaccine on the day. So if you're feeling really unwell with anything, be it COVID-19 or not COVID-19, you're actually advised to just get the vaccine once you feel better. But the reason we specify that you should wait about 4 weeks after having contracting COVID-19 is just to make sure that none of the symptoms that you get after the vaccination or none of the symptoms are wrongly attributed to either COVID-19 or the vaccination. But yeah, if you've had COVID-19 vaccination, COVID-19 illness before, it won't impact on being advised to get the vaccine.
So I'm getting in the live stream. It would be good to answer the DNA question. So the DNA question is basically, can these vaccines alter your DNA? It's a big concern on social media, and it's based on people worrying about the concept of RNA and foreign code being put into your body. But it's not biologically possible for RNA to go back and change your DNA. But apart from that, it's one of those things that's really difficult to do. It would be, if somebody was able to do that really easily and well, there would probably be companies that would be making a fortune over changing people's DNA, and it just doesn't happen. And none of these vaccines are able to change your DNA. They do not alter your DNA. They do not have any effect on your DNA. They cannot be integrated into your genome. They cannot be inherited. They cannot be inherited to your children. It's just one of those myths that has no basis in scientific fact, and it doesn't happen. So another part of that question, which is not really related, but it's about the variants. So the variants that are arising all over the world in different places. So it's a complicated answer, but one of the things to remember is that this is an RNA virus. The coronavirus mutates all the time. But what happens is that even though there's lots and lots of mutations, there's generally only a couple which become successful and which start to spread throughout the population. So our one that we had in the Kent variant, so-called, it spread quickly throughout the UK population because it had an adaptation, a mutation, which meant it bound to our cells slightly better. So it won the biological race in terms of viruses, and it outcompeted all the rest. The South African one is similar, and there's a Brazilian one, and there's a few others which are arising, but there's not going to be hundreds and hundreds of these. And we also have technologies which are able to account for the differences in the variants. And you saw AstraZeneca group the other week on TV telling you about how they were able to modify their particular vaccine to take account of the variants. And it takes some time to do that, but it actually is not very long. The variants will arise during the season, and by the time that they are expanding in the human population, there will be a vaccine against those. So this is a controllable situation. The variants will always arise, but hopefully if we get the number of people that are infected down low enough, then there will be less variants arising and there will be less chance of this virus bouncing back. I think that we will be able to cope with any variants. They haven't been shown to be more deadly either. They've just been more infectious, and that's important to remember. So don't get scared by the term of variants. Just think about it as it's another sort of hurdle that we can overcome in the way that we've overcome the first hurdle of making a vaccine against SARS.
That's actually that led me to ask you my next question. Because I think actually maybe the word mutation has more of a sinister kind of effect. So when people think about mutations, that's what. But one of the things that we get asked quite a lot within the community and community pharmacy is, will this be a vaccine that we will have to have annually, like the flu vaccine? And I think that's a question that's probably going to be in the minds of many of our listeners and viewers today. It
is. It kind of depends how long and how much immunity we need to have. How long the immunity lasts is the big question. And of course, we've only started vaccinating this year, so we'll find out soon enough. We know from people that were infected even last February, March, we know that they still contain antibodies in their body after a year. So we think that that's possibly the same time frame that could be conceivable with a vaccine. And how much do you actually need? There's been studies done in non-human primates in the United States, which showed that you actually only need a very low level of antibodies to completely protect from the symptoms of disease. The monkeys still get infected, but they don't have any kind of negative outcome. So those are questions that will be answered in time, but I think it's a potential that we would have annual or biannual boosters.
Just to come in on that, in the variants and the sort of tweaking the vaccines that we might need to do and things like that, there's a really good Q&A from Professor Robin Shattuck, which I will post the link to, which answers that kind of reassurance about the variants, that, you know, they were expected, they're not going to stop the vaccines working overnight. And it's a really good Q&A that I would suggest anyone who wants further information to just have a quick look at. It's on the Imperial webpage, we'll post the link to.
Fantastic, that's great. Any other questions in the chat that you can see, Helen, please?
So let's have a look. So there's one from Fiona. What would you say to people, for example, shielders who are worried that the Oxford vaccine isn't as good as the Pfizer vaccine and worried about protection? So I get a lot of questions about this, including from family members, you know, which is better? Should, you know, it's a bit like, which one should I get? So the best COVID-19 vaccine for you to get is the one that you are offered. And this is because if a COVID-19 vaccination has been decided by the regulatory body in the UK and it's been approved for use, this means it meets two criteria. It's safe and it's effective. So this means that both vaccines that we're currently using in the UK, and then the other third one, the Moderna, that will be coming on, has been approved, but we just are not using it yet, has also been judged to be safe and effective. So there really is no advantage to waiting for getting a different vaccine or anything like that. So you really should take any vaccine that you are offered, and there really should not be any question in your mind about which one you should have or which one you should take. And I think sometimes the reporting of the vaccination and sort of comparing the different vaccines, it does compare which is better, which is not. But if it's approved for use in the UK, it means it's safe and effective at preventing COVID-19 disease.
That's brilliant. I would just like to remind our viewers and listeners that you still have time to post some questions in the YouTube chat. You'll need to be signed into your YouTube account or your Gmail account. But any question, we're open to any questions. There's no such a thing as a silly question or a stupid question. I've also got some more questions that were submitted prior to the event. And one of them is why did the scientists go down the route of developing an mRNA vaccine instead of developing a conventional vaccine, which is the one with the attenuated virus? What could the potential long-term effects of the mRNA vaccine? I guess we've answered that. In 10 to 20 years. I mean, that's quite an open question, and I know we've touched on it. But why was it the mRNA that was chosen instead of the attenuated virus?
Okay,
and
so
that's from Daniela.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriella. So the answer to that really is that getting an attenuated virus takes time. You usually have to passage the virus through various cell lines and then watch to see whether it loses functionality and infectivity. And that's actually not a very easy thing to do. Also, the attenuated vaccines can often revert to full pathogenicity. And that's not something that we are, in the modern world, are comfortable in risking. So many attenuated vaccines are not things that we would prefer to develop these days. The messenger RNA vaccines are really great technology because they are so simple, so straightforward, the ingredients are so minimal, they are easily adaptable. So, for example, we saw that it's a classic real-world experiment where we have a messenger RNA vaccine and we can change it within 6 weeks to cope with the variants. I mean, what more could you want? Why would you not think that that was a great technology to use? The adenovirus vaccines that are in the Oxford vaccine, AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, are also technology that uses a different virus to carry the vaccine to the cells. And that virus is something that's been worked on for years. So the platform technology for that is old and used many times. But that also isn't a viable living organism on its own in the way that an attenuated vaccine would be. So while people look at traditional vaccines and think, oh, they're traditional, therefore they must be better, that's not the case. There's lots of traditional things that we are moving away from because we have modern technology. It's like, if you wanted to use a computer, would you use the traditional 1981 ZX Spectrum? No, you wouldn't. You'd use your iPhone, which is 1,000 times more powerful than that computer.
That's true. Actually, while we're talking about this, Paul, one of the things that one of the questions that came from SNES, while you're on the subject of the vaccine, why does it need to be stored in such low freezing temperature? He asks. Why doesn't the liquid freeze in these conditions? And that's obviously about the Pfizer vaccine.
So the liquid does freeze. The Pfizer vaccine, whenever you take it out of the -80, -70 freezer situation, it's frozen. Whenever you thaw, you don't put frozen things into people. So you wait until it thaws to room temperature, and then you can keep it at room temperature for a day or a couple of days. I'm not quite certain of their time period of what they recommend, but I think it's a number of days. But of course, because we take them out of the freezer and then within like half an hour, the entire vial has been used because it's vaccinated 5 people. So that's what we want to do. But freezing is not necessarily a great situation, and whenever you're trying to get vaccines to places where there aren't readily available freezers. And so for this country and for many Western countries, the Pfizer vaccine is a great candidate. The freezing doesn't have an effect on us. But if you want to take it across the globe, then obviously something like the AstraZeneca vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, which can be at room temperature for a long time, they're ones that would be preferred for those uses. So it's not frozen when it goes into people. That's really important to tell people. Okay,
thank you. That's great. And just a quick question for you, Helen, please. What is the efficacy of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine on the 70 to 74-year-old? The first percentage and the second, but especially in that age group. And I think it might be particular because there was something in the news about the AstraZeneca in that age group.
Yeah, so that directly links to one of the questions we had actually from the audience from Newcroft, who asks about what does efficacy really mean. So I think it's really clear to clear up sometimes the difference between efficacy and effectiveness. So the efficacy of a vaccine is about how it works in a clinical trial situation. This is a highly controlled environment where lots of different variables are controlled. Effectiveness is really how the vaccine works in a real life situation when it's actually rolled out in the general population. So efficacy we get from the phase 3 large clinical trials that we do, which we base a lot of the recommendations on. And then effectiveness we monitor with the phase 4 clinical trials that are kind of going on now, in that we literally monitor what's the impact when we start vaccinating the general population under non-trial situations. So I think that's really important to get clear. With regards to the AstraZeneca vaccine and the efficacy in older adults, there has been a lot of stuff that's been reported in the press recently. And this all comes down to basically how things may be interpreted in data. But what we need to be really clear about is that we have good evidence in the immune response from the early trial data of the AstraZeneca vaccine that it works effectively in the older age groups, including those who are over 65 and 70. And the World Health Organization, the European Medical Agency, and then also the regulatory agency in the UK have all agreed that it should be, we expect it to work in that older age group, and that they agree that the early data showed good immune responses. We don't actually know the exact efficacy in the over 65s because not enough people in those phase 3 trials in that age group got COVID-19 during the trial. But that's not something to be concerned about, because actually the data that we do have shows that it should work in those older age groups. But it's just that we need a bit more data that will be coming to understand the exact efficacy. But there's nothing to suggest that it won't be effective in those age groups. And I don't know, Paul, if you want to come in with anything more on that.
No, that's absolutely it. It's just the data in the trial didn't have enough numbers. As Helen says, they're doing the real world experiment now, and we will find out the effectiveness of the vaccine. There's estimates that it's really extremely high. So it works.
It's great. It's great to clear this up, because when you hear something like this in the news and you have no one to ask, that's why I guess this event was set up in the first place, because these are the exact concerns and questions that people had. So I'm glad that we all spoke about this, and I think we're actually coming to the end of our event. So thank you guys. It's been really great. I just want to ask you, maybe each one of you, if you've had any questions that you've been asked by family, friends, acquaintances, people at work that we haven't actually covered this evening. So can I go to you first, Paul, please?
Yeah, I think we've covered all of the questions that I've had. I mean, I've even had pregnant or doctors that are intending to get pregnant ask me whether they should have a vaccine or not. I'm thinking, well, I think you probably know better than me. But yeah, all the questions are, it's just really important for us to be open and to try and answer people's questions as best as we can. And also to get over this idea of it's okay to have questions about the vaccines. It's okay to be concerned about things you're injecting into your body. And I'd like to differentiate those types of people from, the anti-vaxxers, the people who are just have some sort of ideological thing against the vaccines. And there's such a small number of people, but they have, of course, a loud voice on social media. But people who have vaccine questions, it's great to ask questions. You should always ask questions about any intervention that's going to happen to you.
That's great. Thank you. And for you, Helen, please, same question.
Yeah, so I think I would completely agree with Paul. I've been asked multiple different questions by colleagues, family, friends, and things like that about the COVID-19 vaccine. And that is great. We should ask questions. My one thing is that you must always think about the reliable sources of information that you're getting answers to those questions from. And that's the most important thing, that it's fine to have questions. We should ask questions. And also, I'm so excited that more people than ever are asking questions about vaccine science, because vaccines are amazing. They save millions of lives, have done for decades. They're the best intervention, sort of second to clean drinking water, that we have around the globe. They're fantastic. So the more questions and the more informed we all get about vaccines, it's fantastic. But if you're looking for answers to those questions that you have, you must go to reliable sources of information. Things that are shared and forwarded multiple times on WhatsApp, even if they say it's from a doctor, you must think, is this actually reliable? So you need to go to the NHS website, you need to go to Public Health England, which have really useful leaflets. You need to go to things like the British Islamic and Medical Association. There are loads of really reliable sources of information that have answers and do loads of myth busting. So I think that would be my big sort of take home message, is ask the questions, but when you ask the questions and you look for answers, get them from reliable sources of information. And if you have any questions that aren't answered by those, just ask your doctor, ask a nurse, ask a midwife. Everyone is able to answer questions on this, or if they don't know the answer, they know where to get the answer.
Yeah, that's true. And I always speak to people generally and say that if you have got any specific questions, the best person maybe you should go to is your own GP and your own pharmacist, because these are people who are holding your records, your information. They know about, any long-term conditions you may have, any allergies and so on. So again, I just want to reiterate this to our listeners and to our viewers tonight, that if you do have any questions, any queries, any concerns, or you need further advice, you can contact your GP, you can contact NHS 111, you can contact your community pharmacist. And it's just really great that we've had so many questions being submitted tonight, and anything that has been unanswered so far will get pulled together at the end of the event and will be answered and sent out in an email. So just look out for your email inboxes in case it comes in the next few days, hopefully, maybe weeks. I shouldn't really put a time scale on it. And if you do have specific questions and concerns, as I said, it is your GP and NHS 111. There'll be a link in the chat as well, where you can access information from the NHS website, specifically COVID pages that are related. Just going to look at my notes here, make sure that I don't leave anything out. There will be, yes, so the link in the chat is to about any more questions that you would like to ask as well, in case we've run out of time and you haven't had a chance to ask questions. There's also a link in the chat to do that. And the final thing that I want to say before I thank Paul and Helen is that we would love to hear what you thought about the event tonight. There's also a link in the chat. This is just to give us and the organizers of the event and the amazing team that put this together, just to give them feedback on how they did tonight, how we all did, how everything came across. And it will take about 5 minutes. And it's really, really important to us. It will help us to improve. And I've had this so many times, people say, really, does it really help you improve? It really does. It's true. 5 minutes of your time could be, you know, the change that we make for the next event. So thank you for that. I would like to thank Helen and Paul. We are very, very fortunate and lucky to have you tonight. The questions were amazing. I think people were really engaged and you guys were engaging. And I learned a thing or two tonight as well.
Well, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. It's great. Thank you.
I was a little bit distracted because I'm thinking, what am I supposed to say next? But it's been really amazing. Thank you, Paul and Helen. Thank you to you at home. It's been a real pleasure being your host tonight, and I hope we see you soon. Stay safe.